Hey everyone, welcome to this week's bonus episode. I am your host, Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker, and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller, Mr. Jones, about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine. And in this special bonus episode, I'm going to be answering questions from our listeners in our beloved Patreon community at the Democracy Defender level or higher, and reading some of their comments too. Thank you to all of our listeners. We have such an extraordinarily interesting bunch all over the world. I'm going to share some of their work that they've submitted to let you all know, you listening wherever you are in the world, that you are not alone. You have some tremendous people listening alongside you, and we're all in this fight for our democracy together. The big focus of this episode is going to be the Christian vote. This is based on a listener question. This episode was already in motion before Trump came out with his charlatan billionaire brand of Bibles that are specially made for a porn star to spank you with. I made up that last part, but I'm sure it's true. And obviously, this begs the question, why would a billionaire sell Bibles? Why wouldn't a billionaire just give away Bibles, right? If he's such a Christian, so-called Christian. So on this news, I just want to say that Trump is desperate for money. He's obviously selling this to pay for his legal funds. The Republicans are in a big financial hole going into 2024. They have a grifter in chief that has cannibalized the Republican Party. And this matters because the war chest that the Democrats have already started with is going to allow them to staff up and hire organizers and build offices across the country that will help them communicate voter to voter. If they're smart, that's what they're doing. That's how Elizabeth Warren had such an extraordinary scorched earth ground game. Obviously didn't win her the nomination. She was up against misogyny. She was a proud progressive who's on the right side of history. So there's a lot that she was up against, but her ground game was extraordinary and kept her in the 2020 Democratic primary for an extraordinarily long time. So ground games do matter. I've witnessed this firsthand. My first job out of college, I was a community organizer. I was working on that ground game in a battleground state that was in Oregon in 2024. We kept the state blue in trying to deny war criminal George W. Bush's second term. Ground game matters. The the Democrats are smart, which we need them to be. Humanity needs them to be right now. They would invest all their war chest into this ground game because this election is filled with fog of war, literally fog of war from the wars raging in the world right now. You have Netanyahu's genocide against Palestinians in his desperate coup to cling to power. You have the status quo American foreign policy that is allowing him to do that. You have the Kremlin and its ally Hungary determined under Orban, the dictator Orban, to get Trump back in. What they ultimately want is a Putin, Orban, Netanyahu, Trump axis of evil to lead the world into a forever dictatorship where they can live above the law, where they can enrich themselves, where they can topple other democracies to ensure that they all comfortably die fat, bloated, and in power. So this is just a statement of where things are headed if we do not stop them in 2024. All right, so in this episode, we're going to see what could potentially bring Trump to power again, and that is the so-called Christian vote. What is it? What does it look like? And how close are we to the so-called far-right Christian extremists that want to turn our democracy into the handmaid's tale? How close are we to getting them to bring Trump back into the White House and it's game over for all of us, right? So that's what this episode is about. So stick around for that. But first, I want to give a big congratulations to President Emmanuel Macron of France for finding his ovaries, for finding his inner strong woman. I'm not going to say for finding his balls, but for doing the right thing in his massively hyped up interview the other week in this month of March, where he said everything that finally needed to be said by a head of state in the Democratic Alliance. This was an interview for a major TV station in France where Macron came out and said, we need to stop telling the Kremlin what we will not do because that shows weakness. We need to leave them guessing, keep them guessing, haunt their nightmares. And this is what I'm now calling the Macron doctrine, because this is the shift we need. This is the direction the Democratic Alliance needs to go in. We don't need pencil neck Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, wringing his hands every time Putin makes a nuclear war threat. Putin will not use nukes on the United States. He may use smaller nukes, type of nuclear technology on regions in Ukraine. Ukrainians know that. They are prepared for that. And they are telling you that they're willing to sacrifice themselves with that threat for all of the rest of us to stay strong and get Ukraine what it needs so they can hurry up and finish this war and liberate major parts of the country that have been taken over by Putin's like Stalin 2.0 regime, where people are being kidnapped and tortured and so on. So if Ukrainians are fine and pushing ahead despite Putin's nuclear war threats, we need to be too. We need to be brave like them too, not wringing our hands. And the Macron doctrine fortifies that. The Macron doctrine says we have a Stalinist regime hell-bent on Russian imperialism and genocide, and they're not going to stop unless they are stopped. So we need to be more determined in our resistance, including leaving them guessing, including putting everything on the table, including sending French troops to Ukraine. This was pretty monumental, and I'm highlighting this so we really take in this moment and what a shift it is creating. And what's also extraordinary, on a personal note, and I think to any longtime listeners as well, because we've all been in this fight together for so long, is 1 week after this massively hyped up interview that Macron gave, it was all over, and like even leading up to the interview, it was like on the front page of French newspapers and magazines and so on. Within a week after this big interview, what played on national French TV? L'ombre de Staline, The Shadow of Stalin. That is the French title of my film, Mr. Jones. So 1 week after the Macron doctrine comes out, Macron is, waving the French flag, singing Le Marseillaise. He's playing out that scene, the cosplay of that scene in Casablanca, where they're all singing the national French anthem in the Nazis' face. That's the energy that he brought across France. The French applauded him. It was a big moment. And they followed it up by playing my film on national French TV. I kid you not. This all went down. And that is why we make art. That is why I toiled away in obscurity. That is why I stared my self-doubt and stood up to it and made it shrink and go away. That is why I learned to climb mountains. That is why I learned how to produce a film with zero Hollywood connections. All for that. All for that. That is the power of art. Personally, that was a moment that I took in, and I had a time of reflection, and I wanted to share it all with you as a reminder that our voices matter. There's so many times when the self-doubt almost censored me. I almost allowed myself to go quiet and not make my film, but I had to overcome all that. And I want you listening wherever you are to overcome that as well, because we need you. We need your voice. You are so important. You're more important than ever right now. And I can't get through what's ahead alone without you. You can't get ahead alone without me. We need each other, and we're going to get through this together. Our voices matter, and never forget that. And that's the lesson that I learned in making Mr. Jones and overcoming so much and doing so. And you can too, in whatever you have inside you that needs to come out, the world needs from you. And so to our Patreon community that keeps the show going, we are doing a special workshop for you on the business side of things on how to get your art out into the world. It's all the business side. It's the stuff that I had, little awkward me, had to learn to get all polished up to be business facing. So I'm going to share all those strategies with you at the Make Art Business Side of Things workshop. That's our catchy title. On Thursday, April 11 at 7 p.m. Eastern. And if you are at the Truth Teller level or higher on Patreon, you already have access to that. Thank you so much. And look out for a Zoom link. They'll be going out that same day. And if you're not already there, if you want to get a ticket to the event, sign up at patreon.com/gaslit. That's patreon.com/gaslit. And it's important for us to focus on getting our art out there in the world, whatever it may be, whatever form it may take, because Steve Bannon and his fascist movement, they're deliberately trying to grind us down. They are so proud and flaunting about getting away with their crimes, about all the obstruction of justice that they got away with. That's what the pardons, all the presidential pardons of Trump pardoning all these people, all these criminals on his way out, from Bannon to Manafort and so on. That's what Project 25 is about. Their blueprint out in the open for purging the United States government, doing a mass purge on day one. It's all flaunting. It's all trying to demoralize us. It's all trying to get in our head. It's all trying to grind us down. And so the way we fight back is we fight for our mind and being creative, allowing yourself to explore your creativity, the power of your imagination, whatever form that may take. Just being curious about it, just going there is an important way to protect yourself and to take back your mind. I make art as an act of self-care in doing this show. I could not do this show week after week without my art. All right. That is what protects me from the Bannons out there and allows me to sustain this work. So join us for that. Again, that's April 11 at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's a follow-up to the Make Art workshop that went out last fall that got a great response from our community. And I've gotten so many beautiful letters from people since then, including questions on the business side of things. So I'll be going through all of my business strategies for being this awkward little artist and pitching and dealing with lawyers, dealing with financing, dealing with fundraising, dealing with investors, dealing with all sorts of folks out there, and how to protect yourself and how to advocate for yourself. That's what it's all about. So I look forward to seeing you all on April 11th at 7 p.m. That's a Thursday, and at 7 p.m. Eastern. Now, let's get on with the show. All right. And as always, this bonus episode is exclusively for our Patreon community. If you want to sign up and hear the whole thing, go to patreon.com/gaslit and become a supporter at the $5 a month Truth Teller level or higher. That is what allows us to keep going. And if you're listening to this over this holiday weekend, if you celebrate Easter, a very happy Easter to you. I am with my family right now in Virginia and enjoying some Easter egg dyeing with the kids, Easter egg hunts. I have been doing all sorts of arts and crafts and finding on Instagram in my quest to get off Twitter. And my daughter and I my preschool and I are recreating all these silly little crafts that I found on Instagram, and it's fun as hell. So I hope you're doing something really fun and relaxing this weekend with your family and charging up, because that's what we all need to be doing right now in this beautiful spring time. And remember, touch grass, look at the blossoms come in, because we're all playing the long game here. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and protecting our democracy together. All right, now let's bring in the mailbag. We've got questions, comments from our listeners. First up is Jim. Jim has a suggestion for a guest. Stephanie Jones Rogers, a historian and the author of the book, They Were Her Property, White Women as Slave Owners in the American South. I looked up this book, and I think this is a fascinating expose on how white women, even though they were treated as second-class citizens themselves still today, but certainly during the era of slavery, they had all sorts of restrictions on their freedom, their movement, social mores that kept them in check, and so on. But yet they were slave owners. And being second-class citizens themselves, they played into the system that was oppressing them. And they were many times as ruthless as the men in how they treated the enslaved people that they owned and how they clung on to that evil profit system. So this is a very eye-opening book, it looks like. I would love to have this historian on. And I think the ideological descendant of these white women owning slaves are, of course, the white women in the swing districts, in the swing states of Electoral College that unfortunately many in the Democratic Party establishment cater to, despite how fickle they are. These are the white women that voted for Trump in the 2016 election, that had no problem with him proudly grabbing women by the pussy and all the credible sexual assault claims against him, and how he was leery and gross towards his own daughter. They were fine in being oppressed themselves in the Republican, proud, staunch, far-right patriarchy, as long as they could have their surge of power and feeling superior towards non-white women, non-white people generally, and anybody that didn't conform to their very limited understanding of the world and themselves. So I would draw a direct link between then and now. And it's those white women that are one of the greatest threats to American democracy. We saw the Republican Party parade one in their response to Biden's State of the Union, and that was, of course, Katie Britt. She was trying to signal to all the white the pumpkin spice lattes out there. I enjoy one from time to time, but not really. But like, not to put the people down that do enjoy those drinks. But like, what I'm saying is that she was trying to go to brunch with all the other white women out there and say, look, let me talk to you, woman to woman, childbearing vessel to childbearing vessel. Let's get down to the brass tacks here. And don't you want to just uphold the lifestyle that you know, continue with your sense of superiority, and so on? Who cares if we have to be second-class citizens in order to claim that white privilege? Let's just do it. Like, that's really what the message was. So I would argue there's a direct link there, and I'm happy to have that historian on. All right, Kate writes, has anyone ever done a deep dive on the money value of white privilege? Yes, I have read some takes on that years ago. But what I want to do, based on your question, Kate, is turn it into a bonus episode to really go into the data on this and put a number sign on it. This would be an excellent episode to do as a follow-up to our reparations episode, which was controversial among some of our listeners. I did get some very heated letters following the reparations show that we did in February. I want to just say my take on reparations, it's just common sense. I just shrug at the opposition to it. I'm like, what's the big deal? If somebody can prove that they were descended from enslaved people that were exploited, where the free labor built this country, who cares if they get the justice that they are long due? I'm totally fine with that. To me, it's not a big deal at all. I really think that reparations are just common sense. I think there's taboo around it because the moneyed class, the 1%, fears those floodgates opening, because much of the money class, the 1%, has made their fortunes, their generational wealth, off of exploitation of either bodies or the environment. And that even includes poisoning the environment, right? So we don't have the strictest regulations in America, as we all know. So I think really the disinformation machinery out there, the deep-pocketed corporate lobbyists out there, are really going hard against reparations and making it just like an untouchable issue, because they do not want to go there. Because once you start pulling that thread, where is it going to stop, right? Everyone's going to be forced to pay up. But guess what? In a time of historic inequality, when the oligarchs are earning so much, they could afford reparations. Never forget that. They can afford reparations, and it's not going to stop at people descended from enslaved people. It's not going to stop. We're going to make those oligarchs in Russia pay their reparations for Ukrainians everywhere. You know, my grandfather lived through the Holodomor. I got that all documented. Maybe we can get some reparations for that. So what I'm telling you is, part of our shared liberation is shared reparations, all right? Because that's how you force accountability, and that's how you force stricter regulations, and that's how you force a sustainable future for all of us, all right? So reparations, don't be afraid of it. They want you to be afraid of it. Let's all normalize reparations together. And as part of that, I'm going to take Kate's lead here and do an episode soon for you all, looking at the money value of white privilege, going into white privilege in terms of comparing types of neighborhoods with all sorts of social services that kids grow up in, of course, schools, access to loans and other financing, and so on, and inherited wealth and all of it. And what does it all come down to? What's the number? So more on that soon, everybody. All right. So Paul writes, hi, Andrea. My colleague Anna Mueller and I are big fans of the show. Thank you both so much. We wanted to share a little about a program we started in Michigan called Art and Agency. I will paste a link below. We were wondering if you are planning any Make Art action for Michigan in the fall. I would love to. If you have any opportunity for me to speak virtually, to fly over, do an event with you in Michigan, I am available to you. You just let me know, Paul and Anna. And I will share the information about your incredible Art and Agency program in the show notes for this week's episode for all of our listeners out there to check it out and get inspired and maybe start something similar in your community where you live. Thank you all who make art out there and to help others do the same. All right, now we have Mike. Mike wrote, so reflecting on Gaslit Nation's focus on art, I'm not what most people would consider an artist. I don't make music or write screenplays or paint pictures, but as a city planner and transportation planner, I do collaborate on plans for the future. These visions of the future are also a form of art. For example, for the past year, I've been consulting on the Federal Railroad Administration's Amtrak Daily Long Distance Service Study. If implemented, this plan will double the number of Amtrak long-distance routes crisscrossing the country and make it much easier for Americans to travel by train. I give more details on the plan in this blog post. I would love for Gaslit Nation to give this study some airtime. You've got it, Mike, because you're absolutely right. The reason why artists, the intelligentsia generally, and you would obviously fall into that, get targeted is because they envision alternatives to the future where dictators like Putin want you to think that they are inevitable. They rewrite the past, so you're surrounded with the past and the future and the present being nothing but the dictator. They have always been, they will always be. You cannot stop them. And it's all a big mindfuck to grind you down and get you to submit. And that is why dictators target the artists, target the intelligentsia, because they create alternative futures and they preserve historical truths. And that's what makes them so extraordinarily dangerous to the dictator. So yes, you, my friend, are an artist for envisioning a future and being creative in what's possible. So I will share your work absolutely with our community of listeners. Look out for the website. Look out for the blog post that Mike wrote on ways for the federal government to improve passenger trains for America. America has abysmal commercial rail. Europe is way ahead of us. And that's part of the solution to the climate crisis, because then you're not taking gas guzzling planes, you're taking trains, which are better for the environment. China is way ahead of us on this. It's an embarrassment where the US is with our trains, for passenger trains. And it's likely by design because we are a gas station republic. The coal and oil lobby has us hostage. Both parties, but the central nervous systems of both parties, really. Like, look at Joe Manchin, look at Sinema and how they blocked Build Back Better, which was going to further a lot of these policies to green our country. We are a huge country. We're a massive country. We need to have a stronger rail system. We are also a major oil producer and polluter, and we need to rein that in as well. And by pushing for reforms, pushing for innovation, for pushing for envisioning a better future for consumer rail, travel across the United States, we're going to get there. It's all part of the solution for building a sustainable future for all and fighting the climate crisis together. So thank you so much, Mike, for your work and your creativity and your artistry. Thank you. So Linda wrote in response to the recent episode, How to Contain MAGA and Why the New York Times Wants Trump to Win. She wrote, I would encourage you and your guests to start telling people who really is behind this. Everyone keeps saying Trump did this or Trump did that, and Trump was and is the only mouthpiece behind what is happening. Trump is not smart enough to know that the districting maps needed to be changed or anything else for that matter. So who whispered in his ear? The Heritage Foundation, Steve Bannon, the Federalist Society? Yeah, absolutely. So we are going to delve in more, including doing a explainer episode on Project 2025 that you can share with your family and friends so they wake up and understand the urgency of this election and how we need them now more than ever, because this is not a drill. There are no do-overs after November 5th, 2024. So Linda will get more into the corrupt architecture that's driving Trump, naming names, making people that think they can hide in the shadows famous, and doing that in such a way that you can share it all with your communities to help engage them in this fight for our democracy. Laura writes, what are your thoughts on Katie Porter calling the California Senate race rigged after she came in third? My answer to that is that all major races, like Senate races and presidential races, are rigged against progressives. That's just a fact. And Katie Porter has been so effective with her whiteboard in the House that she was sort of forced off of some key committees where she really shone as a star, and that has sort of put her more in the background and less viral videos for her. And that's all by design, because the central nervous systems of both parties, the centrists of the Democratic Party, take from the same trough as the Republican Party. It's the same corporate donors. And Katie Porter and other progressives are a threat to that because they simply want them to pay their fair share in taxes, because we desperately need that revenue to invest in our communities, especially when it comes to bracing for the impact of the climate crisis, which is going to get worse and worse. The progressives are right. I don't agree with their foreign policy. Gaslit Nation exists to provide progressives a way to have a common sense foreign policy that's not isolationist. But they're right. Progressives are right when it comes to many domestic issues, because we're living in a time of historic income inequality. We're living in a time of oligarchy because too many are getting away with murder, with theft. That's what it is. When Ukraine overthrew its oligarchs in the 2023-2024 Euromaidan Revolution of Dignity, they were chanting bandits out, bandits out. That's how I see all these corporate greed monsters, as bandits. By not paying their taxes, by hoarding their wealth in offshore bank accounts like Apple does, they're really stealing from my kids. They're stealing from your kids. This money needs to be invested in public services, including the rail system. All right. Now we're going to go into the big centerpiece of this week's episode. It's a question from James. And here it is. How worried should I be that MAGA, church Christians, will vote in such a monolithic bloc that the bad man gets back in the Oval Office? I just think that they are literally brainwashed into doing his bidding and Putin's bidding, and our democracy is bye-bye. Does anyone know how many actual people like this there are and what kind of electoral difference they could make? All right, everyone. So let's take a dark journey into the mind of the so-called Christian voter and what chance they have in getting Trump over the finish line on November 5th, 2024, so he can unleash the beast